There are men whose lives become legends. Then there are those whose legends become warnings. John Dee was many things: mathematician, navigator, advisor to a queen, and architect of one of the greatest libraries in Renaissance Europe. But behind the titles and beneath the brilliance was something stranger, something darker. Dee believed he had spoken with angels, and worse still, he believed they had spoken back. This is not a tale of myth. It is a reconstruction drawn from Dee's own words, his diaries, rituals, and the strange alphabet he claimed was gifted to him by celestial beings. It is a journey through shadowed halls and burning visions, across courts and cathedrals, and into the mind of a man who dared to cross the boundary between heaven and hell. What you're about to hear is nonfiction. It is the account of a man who opened the gate and found something staring back. Some called him a genius, others a heretic, but all who knew his story understood this: once the mirror speaks, it never goes silent. The fire in Mortlake's hearth had nearly died, leaving only a faint orange glow that flickered across the stone walls, like a breath from another world. Outside, the Thames twisted in silence beneath a shroud of fog, the river's black waters whispering secrets into the night. Inside, among rotting books and cracked instruments, sat a man whose mind had once charted the heavens. Dr. John Dee, aged, hollow-eyed, and forgotten by the court that once exalted him, hunched over a tattered diary. His hand, which in youth had drafted star maps and summoned spirits, now trembled uncontrollably. The ink he spilled onto the parchment was more than just record. It was confession. Years had passed since he had last heard the angels' voices. Decades since he and Edward Kelley had gazed into the black mirror and received language not born of this earth. Dee's brilliance had once commanded the ear of Queen Elizabeth herself. Now, only ghosts remained. Around him, the shadows shifted with strange deliberation, as if animated by forces unseen. Books creaked open on their own accord. The walls exhaled. Mirrors, long covered in cloth, pulsed beneath their wrappings. Still, Dee wrote, for whom no one knew. He claimed the words were not his, that something else guided his hand, that the veil between worlds had thinned too far, and what once whispered now walked freely in his home. He no longer wrote for kings or scholars. His diary, smudged with age and grease, bore words meant for the unknown reader, the one who might someday follow the same path. In that final winter of his life, Dee remained convinced of one truth, that the divine had spoken to him, and so had something else. The boundary between angel and demon, he feared, had never been clear. And if he had opened the gate, they were still watching. John Dee was born in London during the winter of 1527, a season marked by biting winds and thick, coal-laced fog. His father, Roland Dee, served in the court of King Henry VIII, affording his son access to an education that few in England could dream of. Even as a boy, John was strange, brilliant, but distant. His mother, pious and soft-spoken, worried early on that her child's mind was reaching into places not meant for the living. By the age of 15, Dee had entered St. John's College at Cambridge, where he devoured classical texts at a feverish pace. He studied geometry, astronomy, theology, philosophy, and everything that he could find that touched the edges of the known world. His peers feared him. His professors admired him. They whispered that he never slept, that he solved theorems in his dreams. It was at Cambridge that Dee constructed a mechanical scarab, an automaton powered by clockwork, which crawled across the table like a living thing. It terrified the servants. Some accused him of witchcraft, and he laughed in their faces and quoted Archimedes, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." In 1548, seeking broader minds and older secrets, Dee left for Leuven. There, beyond the cautious boundaries of English academia, he found the forbidden text he had long desired. He pored over Agrippa's De Occulta Philosophia, studied the Picatrix, and sought meaning in half-lost fragments attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. What he found wasn't madness, it was order, a design beneath reality, a divine structure hidden in number, language, and star. The stars, he began to believe, were not just lights, they were symbols, keys. Upon his return to England, he carried with him not just books, but a reputation. Some called him a genius, others a heretic. Queen Mary's court briefly imprisoned him on suspicion of sorcery and treason. His astrological calculations had been misread as omens of her death, and after weeks of solitary confinement, he was released. But the fire in his mind had only grown. When Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558, Dee's fortunes changed. The new queen saw in him not a threat, but an asset. She summoned him to court, consulted him in private, and tasked him with reading the heavens for signs of political tides. To the world, Dee appeared as a learned man, a scholar, an astrologer, a servant of crown and country. But in the quiet hours, when the mirrors were uncovered and the stars were in alignment, Dee pursued something else entirely. He was not simply a man of learning, he was a seeker of the divine. Among John Dee's earliest surviving notebooks lies a curious annotation, unrelated to equations or anything else. It is a short, unstructured passage scrawled between pages of Euclidean geometry. Its ink is faded, its tone uncharacteristically unsettled. At the time, Dee was 17. The notation describes a peculiar moment during his studies. While working late into the night, he had begun to perceive patterns behind the diagrams. Geometric shapes not drawn by his own hand, but somehow embedded in the margins, as if waiting to be discovered. One in particular, a star inverted upon itself, surrounded by 7 eye-like nodes, seized his attention. He traced the symbol absently into the wood of his desk. Hours passed. When he awoke, his fingers were stained with ink and blood, and the symbol had been etched into the oak grain, as though burned there, and no one could explain how. That night, he dreamed of a staircase spiraling downward into a vast library where the shelves were alive and the books whispered as they breathed. At the bottom, beneath candlelight that gave no warmth, sat a robed figure with Dee's own face, smiling and waiting. The symbol appeared again in later notebooks, always subtle and always incomplete. He never spoke of the dream, but in the years that followed, he would return to that symbol again and again, redrawing it, refining it, searching for its meaning across dozens of languages and forgotten grimoires. Even then, something had marked him, and whatever it was, it had not come from this world. By the time Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne, John Dee had become more than a scholar. He was a name that stirred awe and fear in equal measure. Her Majesty summoned him early in her reign. The young queen, poised and unshaken, met with Dee in her lavender-scented chamber at Whitehall. It was said she asked only one question: "Is it true you can read the stars?" To which he replied, "I do not read them, Your Majesty. I listen to what they sing." So began his rise as England's celestial advisor. He chose the date of Elizabeth's coronation. He aligned treaties by planetary hour. War, diplomacy, even royal marriages passed through Dee's calculations before they passed through Parliament. But beyond his duties to the crown, Dee's ambition stretched far deeper. His estate at Mortlake transformed into a labyrinth of scrolls, globes, instruments, and mirrors. Books lined the walls, many forbidden, most written in tongues no ordinary man could translate. It was said his library rivaled Oxford's. Explorers and captains sought his counsel before crossing seas. Francis Drake visited him more than once and returned haunted, speaking in hushed tones of spectral lights above strange waters. Foreign diplomats left Mortlake whispering that Dee had not merely observed the future, he had spoken to it. To some, he was a visionary. To others, a heretic in disguise. At the center of it all stood Dee, measuring orbits, composing invocations, drawing complex sigils by candlelight. Mathematics became music. Music became vibration. Vibration became prayer. And then prayer became something else entirely. He began constructing ritual circles in secret, fasting, reciting ancient names while gazing into obsidian mirrors and calling out to the beyond. For a time, nothing answered. Then one evening, a strange mirror, black, glassy, and cold as stone, began to hum. It had been delivered by a trader from Venice who claimed it came from a jungle temple in the New World. The man refused to enter the house and fled as soon as the mirror crossed the threshold. Dee placed the artifact in a western corner of his chamber, and soon after, strange things began to happen. A whisper in the dead of night, a shattered inkwell without cause, unintelligible symbols drawn by unseen hands into the dust of his window sills. Dee began dreaming of faceless women crawling across ceilings, drawing sigils with their bleeding fingers. His hand would move without his will, writing phrases he did not understand. Jane Dee, his wife, grew pale and fearful. Once, she stood motionless before the mirror for nearly an hour. When Dee touched her shoulder, she screamed, claiming a voice had spoken her name from inside the glass. Their youngest child cried out each night, insisting an angel without eyes stood at the foot of his bed. Yet still, Dee persisted. He believed he had reached the edge of heaven's veil. He did not yet understand that the veil, once torn, lets anything through. The servants would later say the man never knocked. One moment, the estate at Mortlake was quiet, its halls filled with the usual creaks of old timbers and rustling manuscripts. The next, a stranger stood just beyond the threshold, cloaked in what looked like starlight woven into silk. He did not walk up the lane. No one saw a carriage. There were no footprints in the frost. He asked for John Dee by name. Dee met him at the door, and what followed remains one of the few events he never attempted to explain. The visitor carried no satchel or scroll, only a peculiar object in his hands, a brass timepiece, smooth as bone, its face covered in glass that shimmered like water. Its hands turned counter to time. It ticked softly, not like a clock, but like water dripping into an empty basin. The man asked Dee where he had been born. Dee told him. The stranger corrected him. He then took Dee's hand and whispered something so softly that no one else heard it. But whatever was said caused the scholar to be pale. He turned to fetch ink and parchment, and when he returned to the doorway, the visitor had vanished. No trace, no footprints, and no ticking clock. Later that night, Dee wrote a cryptic note in the margin of his astrological chart. A man of no century came to remind me, not all visions are called. Some are sent. The mirror in the west chamber began to hum again. Edward Kelley entered Dee's life like a crack of thunder across a still pond. A man of shifting pasts and uncertain intentions. He arrived with rumors trailing behind him of grave robbing, forgery, and whispered seances and forgotten chapels. He was a scryer, he claimed, a man who could see beyond the veil. Dee, ever the seeker, did not hesitate. Their first invocation took place in a consecrated room within Mortlake. Dee had drawn the necessary circles in powdered silver. At its center, an obsidian shoe stone rested atop a carved pedestal. Kelley, trembling, sat before it, while Dee recited a Latin invocation that had not been heard aloud for centuries. At first, there was only silence. Then Kelley's mouth opened, not in speech, but in awe. His eyes rolled back. His breathing changed. He began to describe what he saw. An enormous being of fire and geometry, crowned with 12 wings, speaking with a voice that fractured the air like glass. The being called itself Uriel. From that moment, the sessions became daily. Dee, feverish with purpose, transcribed everything as Kelley channeled it. Names of celestial beings, warnings of judgment, encrypted prophecies, and the foundations of what they came to call the Enochian language, a divine tongue said to have preceded Babel. The spirits demanded obedience. They dictated exact rituals and fasts. They required the construction of wax sigils called lamens and requested tables of letters set in grids that shifted as they spoke. Some symbols appeared in Kelley's skin overnight, blistered into his forearms without pain or cause. The most frequent visitor was Madimi. She first appeared as a young girl in a crimson gown, speaking with a sing-song voice. But in later visions, she took the form of a winged woman, crowned with blood and serpents, delivering paradoxes and riddles, sometimes weeping, and other times laughing. You seek the throne, she told them once, but you walk the serpent's spine. Kelley suffered frequent collapses. Once, he did not rise for 2 days. He claimed that in the space between breaths, he had seen the edge of creation, a library of ash watched over by angels whose faces had no mouths. The house grew colder with each ritual. Servants refused to enter certain rooms. Jane D. began sleeping in the eastern wing. Strange marks appeared on the children's bed sheets, shapes no one had drawn. One of the mirrors in the hallway shattered inward, though no one was near. And still, the angels came. And with each new session, Dee believed he was closer to something holy. But something was watching, even then, from beyond the mirror's edge. One night in late autumn, during a particularly grueling invocation, Edward Kelley's body went unnaturally still. The candlelight flickered violently. The air grew thick and metallic, as if the room itself had been buried underground. Then, without warning, Kelley convulsed. His eyes rolled upward, and his lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. His hand, ink-stained and trembling, reached for a piece of chalk and drew a spiral onto the wooden floor. The symbol expanded, slowly, precisely, until the circle of invocation was covered in curling ash. John D., watching from across the ritual boundary, dared to speak. "What do you see?" he said. Kelley's voice returned, hollow and slow, as if echoing from a great depth. A throne, black, carved from stone that bleeds shadow. His eyes remained unfocused. It rests in a cavern beneath the world. There are eyes on the walls. 100, maybe more. Watching, but blind. Dee leaned forward. "Who sits upon it?" Kelley began to shake. It wears your name." He wept as he spoke. "It has your hands, your voice, but its face is gone." Kelley collapsed before he could say more. For 3 days he did not rise. During that time, the spiral on the floor could not be removed. When they attempted to wash or scrub it away, the chalk only darkened, staining the wood like soot. On the second night, the spiral began to glow faintly under the moonlight, even through the closed shutters. Dee attempted prayers and ritual purification, but nothing worked. At sunrise on the 4th day, the spiral had vanished, but only from sight. Its presence lingered, like pressure in the mind. Later, when Dee reviewed the notes from that night, he found several pages had been overwritten by unseen hands. Each contained the same phrase, repeated again and again. I sit where you would stand. The following entries were recovered from a sealed compartment in John Dee's library at Mortlake. Bound in calfskin, the pages were splattered with candle wax, scorched at the corners, and in places smeared with what appeared to be blood. They were also not written in Dee's typical meticulous hand. March 4th, 1581, Mortlake. They come now even when I do not call them. The scratching behind the walls has begun again. I hear wings above my bed, though the roof is still. The language flows through me like a fever, but I cannot stop writing. The phrases burn. I do not know who watches me. I fear they never stopped. March 21st, 1581, vernal equinox. Madimi appeared tonight with blood staining her mouth. When I demanded to know what offering had been taken, she smiled and pointed towards the nursery. Jane claims she heard only foxes in the night, but I know better. There are no foxes in Mortlake. April 2nd, 1582. Kelley has drawn something he claims was dictated by Raphael himself. A sigil unlike any I have seen. Too sharp. Too living. It burned into the desk as he inked it. The wood hissed. When I buried the parchment in the garden, I heard it scream beneath the soil. In these entries, Dee's usual confidence had frayed. He no longer questioned the veracity of the voices. He questioned only their intent. He had asked the spirits if they served the light. They had not answered. Only Madimi returned, transfigured, her eyes hollow, her wings weeping fire. She told him, "There is light in the pit, but it is not holy." By 1582, John Dee had left England behind. He traveled across Europe, carrying trunks of scrolls and angelic tablets, trailing behind him the lingering scent of burnt wax and scorched faith. At his side walked Edward Kelley, no longer just a scryer, but something more, something darker. The spirits had told them to go east, to the land of fire and crystal, to the place where men dream beneath stone. They went first to Krakow, and to Prague, and to the court of Emperor Rudolph II, a monarch enthralled by the occult, a man who collected philosophers like weapons. There, Dee and Kelley were received with awe and suspicion. They conducted ceremonies behind veiled doors. Priests watched them with clenched rosaries. It was in Prague that things began to change. The angels, if that's what they were, no longer waited to be summoned. They began appearing at will, through mirrors and reflections, and voices rising from ink. Guests at the palace reported the air turning cold during Dee's sessions. Others claimed to see pale shapes moving across his walls, flickering like flames behind curtains. Kelley grew unstable. He stopped sleeping. He spoke in tongues even outside of the ritual. He carved sigils into his arms, claiming they had been dictated by Madimi herself. He drank heavily. Some nights, he stared at the shoestone for hours, even after the ceremony had ended, muttering, "They are watching. They are inside me now." Once, he disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he was barefoot. cloaked in bloodied robes, and smelled of ash and rose water. He refused to speak of where he had been. Dee recorded visions more disturbing than anything before. One spirit declared that the throne of heaven had been emptied. Another whispered of a divine war that had already ended in failure, that mankind's creation was a correction of a celestial error. And then came the demand that destroyed them. In a voice that turned glass to frost, the supposed angel, Nalvage, spoke. To bind yourselves in unity, you must share the vessel of flesh. You must share your wives. Dee wept. Jane Dee, faithful and long-suffering, collapsed in grief. Kelley said nothing, his face unreadable, but Dee obeyed. What happened that night in the upper chamber of the estate was recorded in no journal, but something shifted forever after. Jane never looked Dee in the eye again. Kelley became hostile, erratic, and paranoid. Their work faltered. In Poland, Kelley began refusing rituals. He accused Dee of manipulation, of twisting the will of the angels to serve his own ego. During one final invocation, he rose without warning and smashed the shoe stone with a hammer made of meteoric iron. "They are devils," he screamed, "and you are their scribe." He fled the next morning, taking stolen manuscripts and angelic tablets with him. Years later, word reached Dee that Kelley had fallen from a tower in Prague. Some said he had jumped, others that he had been thrown. His body was never recovered. But even in Mortlake, Dee swore he could still hear Kelley's voice. It came in the dark, just beyond the edges of sleep, whispering through shattered reflections. "John, you opened the gate. You never closed it." When John Dee returned to Mortlake in the waning years of the 16th century, he found nothing as he had left it. The once glorious library, his life's work, had been ransacked. Scrolls and sacred volumes were gone. Precious grimoires had been torn apart, their pages used to stoke fires. What remained lay scattered across the floors, like bones after a feast. His telescope had been shattered, his angelic instruments desecrated. Jane greeted him in the silence. His children, now older, offered him wary glances. Some refused to stay in the house after nightfall. The servants whispered behind doors. Locals crossed themselves when he walked through town. But Dee, hollow-eyed and gaunt, resumed his work. He began to reconstruct the Enochian tablets from memory, though the letters came broken, twisted, sometimes reversed. He no longer spoke aloud the angelic names. His voice cracked when he tried. The spirits no longer required invocation. They came on their own accord. At first, they appeared in the reflections, eyes flickering in silver trays, faces behind mirrors that moved too quickly to see. But soon, the manifestations became physical. Books flew from shelves, candles extinguished without wind, voices whispered to his children through the walls. He sealed the west wing of the house. Jane avoided the library entirely. She slept in a separate room, clutching a crucifix beneath her pillow. One night, Dee awoke to find Madimi standing in the garden, Her form had changed, her eyes hollow, her hair blackened with soot, her wings draped through the soil like wet silk. She did not speak, she only pointed towards the sky. The next morning, Dee discovered pages he had never written lying on his desk. They were in his hand, but bore no memory. The language was unlike anything that he had studied. Even the spirits had not spoken this way. He locked the pages away. Later, he tried to burn them. They would not burn. In 1605, Jane died. There were no last words, no blessings, only a mirror wrapped in red cloth left on the mantel. Dee buried it in the garden, but for weeks afterward, he heard her voice in the night, calling from beneath the earth. Why did you choose heaven over me? But by then, even Dee knew it had not been heaven he chose. It had been something that wore the divine like a mask. In the final days of his life, John Dee spoke little. He wandered the darkened halls of Mortlake, mumbling to himself, his hands forever stained with ink and wax. Most believed his age had finally unraveled the man once hailed as England's greatest mind. But those who saw him closely, who dared to look into his eyes, sensed something else. He had not been abandoned by his visions. They had returned. At night, Dee scribbled furiously in notebooks that no one was allowed to see. He left the lamps lit until morning, in sealed mirrors behind iron-laced cloths. A candle burned constantly in the room where the shoe stone had once rested, though the stone itself was long gone. One evening, neighbors reported a sound, low and resonant, like a pipe organ buried deep underground. Dee's home shook, as if from a distant thunder, yet no storm had passed. What happened inside the house that night was never recorded in full, but the last pages of his surviving diary tell part of the tale. He wrote of voices returning, not as distant whispers, but as shapes in the room. They walked beside him, sat across from him at his desk. They no longer spoke in symbols. They spoke in memory. He claimed Madimi had come one final time, her form shifting with each breath, from child to woman, skeleton and flame. She told him, "You have written the seals, and now we unseal you." That night, every mirror in Mortlake cracked from corner to corner. Books bled ink onto the floors. Walls shook. Light poured from beneath closed doors, and a wind rose from nowhere. The final entry Dee ever wrote, scribbled in an unsteady hand, read, "They did not find me. They were waiting. And now that I have opened the gate, they are not leaving. This is not a warning. This is a map." After John Dee's death, no priest came to bless the home. His manuscripts were locked away or burned. His name was spoken only in hushed tones by those who remembered the strange lights that had once flickered behind his windows. But for those who dared to examine what remained, those who opened his diaries, deciphered his sigils, and translated the ravings scrawled into the margins of his final days, a terrifying vision emerged. Dee had believed that he had unlocked something beyond the bounds of human reason. not simply divine knowledge, but the architecture of reality itself. He had spoken with entities claiming to be angels, beings of immense wisdom, beauty, and terror. And in doing so, he had torn a hole in the fabric of the world. He wrote of gardens made of fire, of libraries that whispered, of thrones surrounded by watching eyes, of souls that sang in languages no living man should ever know. Those who study Dee's work today still argue over the truth of his visions. Were they hallucinations born of obsession and sleep deprivation? Or were they something more, something real, or perhaps ancient? One line, found inscribed in fading ink behind the binding of his journal, remains the most debated. The spirits do not lie, but they do not tell the whole truth. And beneath that, written in trembling script, walk lightly, dear reader. The path to heaven is lined with fire. Long after his bones turned to dust, his work lived on, studied by kings, feared by priests, whispered about secret orders who still use his sigils to open locked doors between worlds. What he saw may never be fully understood, but one thing is certain. Once you call to the other side, it listens, and sometimes it answers. Thank you guys so much for watching this latest episode. I apologize for the wait, but I hope it was worth it. Please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and please comment and share this video around. Definitely head over to my shop over at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com to pick up my books or some merchandise, and consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a channel member by clicking join here on YouTube. I hope all of you are doing well. I know sometimes it can be a struggle, and I just want to remind you that it's okay to not be okay sometimes, and to please remember to take care of yourself mentally, physically, and spiritually, because you're worth it. Anyways, love you guys. Thanks for being awesome, and I'll see you again with another brand new episode very soon. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Make sure to stay safe out there. Take care, and I'll see you next time.